Okay, so as you get started, this is one of the types of beading looms that I distributed to some students. We've got some metal beading looms, and then we've also got some of the wooden ones. This is the video where I'm going to go over how to set up your metal beading loom. So before you get started, you're going to want to make sure that you have a scissor nearby and your little spool of Nymo thread. Okay, so this is the thread that's really nice and thin, and it's going to be able to pass back and forth between your beads and make for a really strong woven piece. You also want to make sure that you have your beads nearby, but when we're just getting threaded, you don't necessarily have to worry about where your beads are. So on here, there's a couple of different pieces to keep in mind. You've got these dowels, which when they are loosened, using these little wing nuts here, can move around. So you want to make sure that your little knobby bit is sticking out and that these are tightened before you start. This just makes sure that you're not going to have to adjust it while you're holding onto your thread. So making sure that these are nice and tight in place is really important. The other thing to notice is these little springs. These are what you're going to thread your warp threads between, and it's really going to hold them in place and keep them spaced out so that you can weave your beads back and forth between them. So once you actually find your D thread, wherever you put it, you can pull out a length, and you're going to start by tying a little knot on the end of your piece here on this knob. So I'm actually going to start by wrapping and putting this knot through right away. It's not a full-blown knot. Like if I were to pull it out, it would still come undone. If I can get this put back in here. Ew. And now I'm going to pull that tight around my knob, and I'm going to complete the knot by making that little 4 again. Wrapping it over and pulling it back up through. And I'm going to pull that nice and tight. That way, as I'm going, I can make sure that my beads don't get pulled off and I have a nice strong foundation to work with. Now, I'm noticing that mine is not tightening up, so I am actually going to tie another little knot here just to make sure. It's always better to be safe than sorry. You can always tie extra knots, but if your piece falls apart in the middle of working with it, it's going to be a super big pain to get it back together. There we go. So now I can tug on it and it's not going anywhere. So as a reminder, we are wrapping the warp threads across, and the warp threads determine the width of your piece. Now, between the two different kinds of looms I've provided, you can make a little bit different pieces, and the number of threads that are available determines how many beads you can put on here. And that's part of why I told you to limit yourself to at most 16 beads or 16 warp threads, just because there might not be enough threads on here. I didn't actually count the number on here, so if you did 16 and this only has 14, I'm really sorry, but I think that this should be able to handle at least 15. So I'm actually going to do 2 different designs because I made 2 and I'm going to show how to use these 2 different looms. And I'm going to use my design that had 9 warp threads on this one. So I know that this is going to handle 8 beads because it's going to have 9 warp threads. I'm going to start from one side and work my way across. So first I'm going to pick a spot over here, lay my thread in between, and pull it straight across. And I'm actually going to rotate this just a little bit as I go. And I want you to see that I'm just wrapping it up underneath and going into the next thread. So here's 2. I tried to put this on a darker color bottom just so you could actually see what was going on, but this thread is so fine that I don't know if you'll be able to see it. But I'm just going back and forth, making sure I'm going straight across. 3. I dropped it, but I'm going to keep it tight. Here's number 4. If you get a point where your warp threads start getting really loosey-goosey, you can undo a few of them and come back a couple steps and hopefully tighten them up that way. Otherwise, I can show you, if you're on a metal loom like this, how to use those wing nuts to your advantage and these dowels that move. Otherwise, oh goodness, I am not doing a good job of keeping these straight. Take your time. There's no rush. 4, there we go. Here's number 5. Number 6. 7. 8. And number 9. And I'm just going to double check to make sure that I have 9 warp threads on here. There we go. There is 9. So holding this taut, keeping this nice and tight, I'm going to pull and give myself a little extra length. I'm going to wrap this around that knob, and I'm going to tie myself a little knot. So I'm actually going to pull it back off the loom here for a second so I can do that partial knot. Get it threaded back into its spot. If this takes you time, don't feel bad, because if you notice, it's taken me time. The key thing is just making sure that you keep your warp threads on their separate spots. And then I'm going to finish my knot. If I can get it wrapped in a circle. There we go. And again, I'm pulling it nice and tight to the actual piece here. And again, I'm going to do an extra little knot just to be safe, because I want it to be nice and tight. So now I have my 9 warp threads and I'm ready to start weaving. If you happen to make it so that you need it to be a little bit tighter, just remember you can loosen this wing nut and you can twist your dowel just a little bit down just to pull that nice and taut.